Uh, awesome, thanks, Nishant. So we'll go ahead and get started, and as other people join, if my fellow board members can help add any people sitting in the waiting room, that would be great. Thank you. All right, so like I said, we've got some upcoming program items in October. We're going to be doing an in-person tour of the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company up in Chico, California. There is a limit of 15 people to go on the tour. It's a fun tour. They're one of the most sustainable brewing businesses, especially in California. They were one of the first to adopt solar and battery storage and a lot of heat recovery. And so it's kind of exciting to hear them talk through the process. And then at the end, we get to taste some of their beers, which is never a challenge. And then in November, we're planning to do a tour of the SMUD utility scale battery facilities. We're working on setting a date and a time for that. And so there'll be more to come out in our newsletters. Please be on the lookout for that. As far as I know, there's not a cap on the attendance on that. So if there is any other details, we'll make sure we pass that along. We do have some other, not a whole lot of information here about other upcoming programs we're developing yet for 23-24, but the board is continuing to scour the internet or our brains or our compatriots for ideas. So if you have any suggestions, we would love to hear them. We like bringing new and interesting either concepts or technologies or locations to our energy colleagues and being able to, pick at them, poke at them, see them if we can, that's great. Otherwise, getting to talk about them too. And in May of 2024, I'm fairly certain that our student chapter, the Chico State chapter, is going to be doing the SMUD Solar Regatta again. They've competed the last couple of years, and we've been able to support them with some technical know-how, as well as our student coordinator on the board, Mirazunmitu, has been fantastic about engaging with them and helping them understand what do they need from us, how can we help support them in their growth, not only looking at scholarships that we have provided or that the National Association provides, but also being able to support them in their development towards the energy industry in general. So a little bit more about the board. You'll see here on the pictures, this is our board. I'm myself president, Nishant is our vice president, Fred Thwaites manages our website, Brian Lina is our treasurer, Josh Sarpadar is our past president, and then we've got Brian Tanahashi and Dan Mendonça working on our newsletter. And then, like I said, our student liaison, Mirazunmitu. If you have any interest in participating in the board, please let us know. We're always on the lookout for energetic new board members, and we can always find something for you to do. So feel free to raise your hand. We'd love to have you be part of us. All right, so now getting into the meat of tonight's presentation. I kind of put this together because a lot of us working in the energy industry or being attached to the energy industry are starting to see lots of both public sector and private sector jurisdictions looking to advance not only carbon-free goals, but also net zero or other sustainable approaches to how they utilize their built environment. Some commitments from our own state started in 2018. There was an executive order that Jerry Brown signed that really pushed the idea of carbon neutrality for the state in a variety of ways by 2045. There were also a couple of bills passed in that same year, encouraging the California Energy Commission to look at how do we now adopt these types of goals into our building codes and reducing building emissions significantly in the upcoming decades. Again, the most recent couple of things that have happened, the California Building Standards Commission adopted the 2022 California Building Code, which has a brand new Title 24 section specifically on electrification and the encouraging of new construction to focus on electrification versus other carbon-based types of approaches for building construction. And what I found interesting when I was searching for information on this is that 76 cities and counties in the state of California have already adopted this 2022 California Building Code with the new electrification standards, which I think is a huge step forward in this electrification journey. So now the question is, how do we pay for it? And in looking towards that, one of my first thoughts was turning to our local utilities because they typically are on the forefront and hearing about these things and changing their rebate programs. So tonight we have two representatives from our local utilities. We have Kelly.Cunningham from PG&E, who's going to be speaking to their programs about electrification. And then we also have, where's your picture? There it is, John Barnes from SMUD to speak to SMUD's programs. And so I look forward to hearing from the both of them. So without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Kelly.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. How should we handle the advancement of slides? Should I just say next or dramatically pause?
You can go ahead and say next slide, and I'll go ahead and make the click.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide, which has a little bit of duplication from your introduction, just setting the context. So I won't linger here for too long, but we have this statewide goal to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, and this has really set a context from which a lot of policies, legislation, and activities from our energy providers and other large participants in the California economy that has the power to really help get towards carbon neutrality are looking to this and informing their plans. And I think you're going to hear a lot from John on how SMUD is doing that perhaps as well. So we'll just go ahead to the next slide where I've created just a short list in a few columns of some of the agencies that PG&E works with in order to actively pursue decarbonization. Some of these are regulators like the CPUC. Some control a lot of the policies that are going to actualize this goal, like California Air Resources Board. And then the California Energy Commission sets policies, exactly what we heard in the introduction, like Title 24, Part 6, our Energy Code, and also is now engaging in building decarbonization rulemaking, as well as is going to be the distributor of a lot of funding that's coming from the federal opportunities to support decarbonization. And I'll let this sit on here for a moment while I give myself an official introduction. My name is Kelly, and I actually work on our codes and standards team. So a lot of what I do within our energy efficiency organization is helping the Energy Commission with research to push that energy code as far as it can cost effectively go to provide a good baseline for California. And the Energy Commission takes the research that we put out there as a statewide collective across the investor-owned utilities and with SMUD and Los Angeles Department of Water and Power as important partners as well. And they decide if the research we put forward is ready for codification. So that's actually what I do, but I'm on the EE team, which also administers our statewide incentive programs in the traditional capacity of which many of you would refer to as incentives or rebates. So in addition to me, I also have here on the call this evening, Jeff.McDowell, who's going to chime in when I get to the slides talking specifically about non-residential incentives. That's my background, and so that's why I chose to show a little bit more about our California context and what all of those agencies, as well as the local jurisdictions, are doing to kind of advance towards these goals. Now, before I move to the PG&E particular part of the conversation, I just want to highlight those local jurisdiction activities. So we have quite a few cities across the state that are really leaning into electrification and creating local ordinances that mandate either additional efficiency measures for mixed fuel new construction or all electric, or they are in some cases saying, you know what, we're not going to build any more new buildings in our areas that use natural gas. There are some exceptions in some of the jurisdictions, but in general, we have quite a few jurisdictions, well over 50 across the state, that have created these local ordinances. Actually, Sacramento is one of them, and that is where I'm located. So that is something that's going beyond what the state is requiring so far. Some of those were paused briefly due to a legal case that's being considered right now between the city of Berkeley and the California Restaurant Association. But in the meantime, a lot of cities are still enforcing those ordinances, and that activity continues to move forward. So when you look at this combination of these 4 columns of activity, PG&E, my colleagues, myself, we really see a lot of momentum towards an all-electric future. So looking a little bit more on the next slide about the PG&E's kind of climate goals. You know, we have our own goals for 2030 to reduce carbon emissions, scope 1 and 2, as well as 3. We have an increase in renewable electricity, an investment to find out for those remaining customers who will continue to use natural gas, how can we make those systems cleaner? And really moving forward with electric vehicles. We have some pretty big goals around making sure charging infrastructure is in place for those. And that ties in as well to our activities at the state level in pushing the California Building Standards Commission to adopt as much as possible in terms of new construction in Part 11 for those EV requirements, and then filling in the gaps with incentives and so on to get that charging infrastructure in place. So I've been with PG&E for about 8 years now, and over the past 2 years, especially with our new leadership from Patty Poppy, really seeing kind of this activity and conversation more in my daily work than I was prior to her being there. So I'm pretty excited about the climate goals. And I'm glad that my work fits into part of what we're talking about this evening in terms of the greater context. So we can move on to the next one. Some of the questions I often get, and I have participated in several presentations on PG&E and electrification. Are those two a bad match? And I get a lot of questions on why would Pacific Gas and Electric be supporting electrification or seeing what you could do to encourage it in certain areas. For several years, we have consistently said that all electric new buildings are good for our customers and the climate, and we welcome the opportunity to not install new gas infrastructure in new construction that is only used for a tiny portion of what it would have been in past years. And instead, if the customer or the jurisdiction wants to go all electric, that would be the preferred way. Let's not install those additional miles of pipeline and infrastructure to then have it be just there sitting as a ratepayer burden, which could negatively impact rates for those who continue to use natural gas. Retrofits are a little more complicated, but a lot of the conversation inside PG&E is really saying, like, when is this going to make sense? And if this is the future, then how are we going to embrace this while still keeping rates affordable? So we are looking at strategies like zonal electrification right now. Are there areas of the state or their neighborhoods that are situated on aging pipeline where if the whole community would buy in, could this be fully electrified and sunset that infrastructure, protect rates, and make sure that we are a contributor to building decarbonization with existing buildings as well? So what are we doing in terms of programs? So this is where I'll bring on Jeff, and he can introduce himself and talk a little bit more about incentive programs, which is what AE asked us to go ahead and bring to you this evening. And I'd love to tell you that we have, a whole cornucopia of programs for non-residential, and this is a growing area. So we're kind of at our beginning phase, but we have a little more for residential. But let's cover what we do have. Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can hand it back to me to talk about CETA if you want. I'll just be standing ready to support you as needed for this slide.
Okay, sounds great. Sound check. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. I also joined PG&E about 8 years ago. I worked in electrical distribution and for lighting manufacturers before that, so maybe on a different side of the fence, so to speak. Most of my experience is kind of more at the, the program level, ground level, not at the policy level. So generally, that's my perspective. Um, so as far as programs that have electrification built in, it's that part of the program design is something that we were disallowed from doing a number of years ago, probably going back 3 to 4 years ago. Our regulators felt that the market could and would provide what was needed, and that utilities, at least the investor-owned utilities, should get out of the program design business. So we kind of see and hear firsthand from those third-party implementers that we contract with a lot of the pain and challenge of wanting to meet this goal, but some of the things that stand in the way at this moment. So I'm happy to present this because this is also one of those groups that can also provide some pressure on our regulators to come up with the matching rates, which will help reduce the costs to getting this accomplished. So currently, there's really one program that makes electrification 50% of what they do. They're in a specific market sector. I think most programs in all of the non-residential market sectors are starting to tip their toes in the water, and that's primarily driven by the customers. Now, the programs that I do are primarily retrofit and retro commissioning, so new construction is something that Kelly can speak to much more. The program that's listed is the government and K through 12 efficiency program. And that is primarily on the leading edge because most of those entities have some kind of a climate goal or climate action plan that they're obligated to make efforts towards. And what we've seen so far is that, they kind of make it on a very small scale. Most of the electrification that we get in those in that market sector is in heat pump hot water heaters. It's a relatively inexpensive investment most of the time to go ahead and remove or properly disable the piping that needs to be done to accommodate what code requires. And then be able to heat, to be able to heat to their needs. Institutions that use large boiler systems and such, there's really not a good electric alternative. So most of these are smaller scale hot water heaters. So that's primarily what we see. And the other program that's kind of, again, dipping their toe in the water is in healthcare. So we're likely to see this changeover not really in large scale, Kaiser and Sutter healthcare facilities in an overall hospital. It's probably more smaller satellite type healthcare facilities. The things that are a challenge for the projects that we've seen come across where folks are interested is, just the infrastructure costs is one of them. If you're doing just a heat pump hot water heater, okay, you probably have space in a panel to be able to accommodate that. It's probably not going to require an extensive amount of rewiring. We did have an opportunity in city of Santa Cruz, where I live, to do the entire wharf. The challenge there was you have wiring that's 50, 60 or more years old. You have panels that are that old, and you have no room to add all of this extra load. Would trigger code that would change not only just the panels themselves, but the wiring to them. So the costs quickly escalated, outside of the bounds of the money available to invest in it. That's not something that we have built into our programs. Our program incentives are currently up to this point, at least up to this year through 2023, are largely on energy savings. There's only moderate energy savings going from gas to electric, you know, from that sense, at least when it comes to water heaters. There's not really a non-residential rate that would accompany that change to go along with it. To me, that's really the biggest factor in it making it pencil out for a customer or an end user to do a full-scale electrification project from an existing building that's, you know, older than 20 years, is that basically they're going to write into a higher electric bill. So, you know, cost drives pretty much most decisions. So that's why we see, again, small incremental attempts to do electrification and, you know, in buildings that are much newer. So we're starting to see a developing profile of what really works at this point. Would be happy to get support from organizations such as yours to, you know, put what leverage you have on CPUC and other folks involved with the rate development process, that there is a need for this. Would be happy to provide any information to you to allow you to do so. We have seen a few, we have to speak to what Kelly was talking about, zonal electrification. We do have a part of the company that they identify some areas where, especially, and that's what drove the Santa Cruz project, where there's a line that really needs to be replaced. There's another example of, there's a school district or a school building, campus, I guess you would call it, in the Central Valley, where they are the only customer that's at the end of this line. And, you know, it's probably going to cost $1 to $2 million to do the replacement that's going to be required. And so that part of the company has a budget to incentivize customers to go ahead and do the electrification. It's a very unique situation. It really doesn't exist anywhere else on the program side, but that gas operations side has a budget to do it, where it makes more sense to electrify and provide incentives to do so than it is to replace the line. So to summarize, all programs have the capabilities to do some form of electrification. It doesn't always fit with what the customer needs. It doesn't always fit with what the customer cost is, or, you know, what the customer's financial profile happens to be. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Kelly for discussion of CETA.
Thank you so much for all that info. I hope it's helpful to our guests this evening. And if you have questions, I don't know, are we putting them in the chat or holding them to the end? What's your preference?
So I had posted in the chat for people to please feel free to add questions in the chat. Typically, typically we'll do chat questions throughout the presentation so that way we're not disturbing your flow. But then we'll open up all the microphones at the end for more robust Q&A if there are still questions that are lingering.
Thank you. I missed that. So good reminder mid-flow here. Speaking about the new construction program briefly, there is a specific program objective for our California Energy Design Assistance Program. This program is administered by a third party on behalf of the state. So this is a statewide program serving all territories, north to south, that are in an IOU region. And it is what it was in the past. It is an evolution of what was Savings by Design, and now it has this new name. So it absolutely has the program objectives of advancing the market to achieve those goals that we've talked about, to promote electrification and all electric buildings, in addition to reducing long-term energy costs and emissions reductions. So it is geared towards incentivizing and high performance measures, and has a component of grid management as part of it. So if you want more information on that, the time to participate in that program is pre-design programming when there's schematic design and design development. It's the beginning of your process for new construction. And it absolutely leans into all electric will receive additional support versus a mixed fuel building by far. So I've got some information on that, and it's a little bit more clear cut. Now, some of the things that Jeff talked about for the long-term operation of the building, a commercial rate for an all-electric facility is TBD. So again, if you're interested in seeing that happen, reach out and talk to our CPUC colleagues and regulators and indicate that you need that rate to make it cost-effective over the long term. Lastly,
Kelly,
when the slides are, yes?
There is one question, a couple questions in the chat. If a customer has an electrification retrofit project that's more than just a direct one-to-one change out, who is the best person to contact?
Okay, so
Justin.
that,
oh,
nope, Jeff first, go ahead.
I was just typing that while you while you were talking. Yes, start out with a rep. I mean, you're probably going to wind up with one of our programs anyway, but best to start with a rep to you know, have them involved. The programs are separated by market segment. So there's one for high tech, biotech. There's one for healthcare. There's one for the institutional market, as I had mentioned, one for grocery, one for commercial and academic laboratories. So they would probably be the best person to start with. They'll direct you based on who the customer is to what the appropriate program is, and then we would kind of go from there. You'd probably run into me somewhere along the line.
And then also for newer facilities, are there programs open to electrification, even though their gas equipment might be new?
Jeff, do you have any insight on the age of the equipment?
No, I really don't. It kind of depends on what we're defining as new.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a component of expected useful life that what kind of incentives can be paid. So yeah, that's kind of situational basis at this point, is what I would say. If it's not a new,
I know on the residential, sorry, Jeff, I spoke over you.
No, that's all right. If it's not a new construction or a gut rehab kind of a project, that would fall into CETA. I'm good. Go ahead,
On the
Kel.
residential side, I do know that there are some rules around payback of installed gas infrastructure that may have been run to the property. I don't know the equivalent rule on the commercial side, but if that's something you want me to follow up with, I could. But for example, if a new home were constructed and there was gas infrastructure installed to serve that home and it is less than 10 years old, then that property may be, they may need to pay back for some of that infrastructure cost to have that installed. After a certain age, then PG&E would cap the gas system without charge to that customer. There may be a commercial equivalent, but that's a second thing to take a look at if you're electrifying a newer building. Okay, I know we only have a few minutes here, so I did include a few slides on resources and incentives for residential. I wasn't sure if members here today were involved in new home construction or had questions even for their own homes. So I did include this, and you can take a look later to see if any of this applies to your work or your personal choices about electrification. We do have a newly released pgne.com/electrification is the link guidebook for individual customers, and we also have an induction cooktop loaner program. And I believe some of you are located in the Davis area, so absolutely this qualifies for you if you want to borrow an induction hob and check it out at your home. On the next slide, I also want to point out that now is a really interesting time to apply for incentives that may be coming through other sources and layering them on top of things that you may receive from your utilities. The Switches On is a really great website, currently focusing on residential incentives, but has some other ones as well for businesses that could, by zip code, identify where there might be incentives. And the California Energy Commission just launched a Building and Home Energy Resource Hub, and I'm expecting to see more about their distribution of funding coming through the different federal sources that will make its way to California residents, builders, developers, homeowners, and occupants of rented properties as those monies become available through the programs they administer. So be sure to look for opportunities where in the past it was like, okay, if you do one, you can't do the other. There's some relaxation and different rules on that now. And of course, our community choice aggregators and our regional energy networks also are offering their own incentives to help move the movement along. In closing, on the next slide, I would be in trouble if I didn't mention the Energy Code. If you are interested in finding out more about those 2022 Energy Code requirements that are in place right now that set the baseline and include those electric ready components, and on the commercial side, requirements for PV and battery that weren't there in the last code cycle, and to take a look at basically what is the pro-electrification components of the 2022 Energy Code. Energy Code ICE offers free training tools and resources, and I put a link in there to what we're calling a collection, which is going to have some highlights there on building electrification. And the last link on the bottom is localenergycodes.com. We'll give you a list of all of those jurisdictions that have adopted a pro-electrification ordinance or an EV reach code, for example, in one place. So when you're preparing for your clients' work in a particular jurisdiction, you could check and see what those elevated ordinance baseline requirements were. So if you have questions, we included our contact info, and I'll turn it back to Jeff for a second to see if he has any closing comments from PG&E.
No, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, there's lots of information similar to what we're seeing in residential, where at least the initial projects in electrification might be a combination of multiple sources of to get people over the funding hurdle. Those things are starting to materialize on the non-residential side as well. They're not as fully formed as the residential is, but we are starting to see there's theoretically in 2024, we will see some new financing that will be available through PG&E that may also allow us to include some infrastructure costs, solar storage, on-bill financing type tools that we can go ahead and at least make some penetration into electrification on the non-res side. So, but thank you for your time. Obviously, the contact information is there. Please reach out. You help us advocate for what we need on the program side to meet our goal. So please do. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly and Jeff. That's really great information. There have been a couple of questions. I know Nat Martin had asked if the slides will be made available after. We will provide a link to the PDF that'll be on our website. If you want to download the slides, the recording will also be posted to our website after the meeting. And we'll share that out in our next newsletter blurb, so that if you want to come back or share the link with other people who weren't able to attend today, please feel free. And then Nat, you had also had another question about updates on non-gas Bunsen burners for labs. That's a very specific question.
It is.
It could be specific, but it's really important because it's a smaller portion, and if you have an all-electric building, that's a lot of pipeline. So I don't know.
Yeah. So I mean, and I know you mentioned some areas that are trying to go all gas, but it's like in the restaurant industry, and I know that's being fought from the restaurant folks. I get that. So there are these niches where it's not going to be as easy to switch over to electric from gas. And I'm having that issue with new labs. And so there's specialized equipment. And I was just wondering if you guys, since you're kind of into this, if you've heard of new equipment like that other places are adopting, or anyway.
I have not. Yeah, I have not. KW Engineering is actually the implementer that does our laboratory program. And if you would like, haven't heard it come up yet, but I'm sure in those circles it is being talked about. KW is very aware of electrification and total system benefit goals, which is kind of right up that alley. So if you want, I could reach out to me and I'll relay and do a warm handoff, and you may get nothing, you may get something.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Excellent. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce John Barnes, who is here from SMUD to talk about SMUD's programs for supporting decarbonization and electrification. So,
thank you so much.
Yeah, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Barnes. I am the Custom Retrofit Program Manager for our SMUD commercial incentive programs. So I wanted to pre-answer a question, actually, that I saw in the chat earlier. I'm going to talk a lot about all of our different electrification programs, and there's going to be a lot of contacts and a lot of emails. If you do have a project or a question about anything that you might be working on, your first contact should be your strategic account advisor. And then once you reach out to them, that'll be kind of your main SMUD contact. When you reach out to them, they can get the appropriate program manager involved. We can help you develop that program or develop your project from there. So, all right, next slide. Okay, so a little bit about SMUD before we get started. We're actually the 6th largest community-owned municipality in the United States. We've been around for over 75 years. Currently, we're serving about 645,000 customers, made up of about 2,300 employees, and we have a 7-member elected board of directors. Recently, we have just adopted our zero carbon by 2030 plan. And so right now, our power supply is on average about 50% carbon free, but with this zero carbon by 2030 plan, we have a goal to reach zero carbon in our electricity production by 2030. And so part of that plan also includes providing beneficial electrification incentives for our customers to also help them electrify and help them reach carbon goals and being clean in general. Next slide. And so what do I mean by beneficial electrification? So at its core, it is just using electricity responsibly. And so going even further, it's using as little electricity as possible to get the same result. And a really common technology that can achieve this is heat pumps. And so specifically heat pumps replacing either a natural gas furnace or an electric resistance heater. And this is because a heat pump works by moving energy. And so it's always going to be more efficient to move the energy compared to making energy in a gas furnace or an electric resistance heater. And then our electrification programs, we really want to help our customers maximize on energy recovery. And so there's a lot of processes, there's a lot of internal plug loads, there's a lot of heat that buildings produce that gets wasted or ejected right into the atmosphere. And so we have incentives designed around trying to help you develop technologies to capture that waste heat and bring it back into the building and make it useful, and make it into useful heat. So next slide. So we have these are the 4 main programs that I wanted to talk about. These are all commercial programs that have electrification incentives. So the first one is our custom retrofit program. This is the program that I manage. It's designed for existing large commercial or industrial buildings. This program, so we can offer either calculated or we have deemed incentives as well that I'm going to talk about. The next program is our Integrated Design Solutions program. This is kind of a sister program to the custom retrofit one, except the IDS program focuses on extensive renovation or new construction commercial buildings. And it's got very similar incentive structures to the custom retrofit program, where they're either calculated or sometimes deemed. The next program is our Complete Energy Solutions program, which is designed more for our small and medium businesses. We call this one our one-stop shop program. And so the CES program, they offer a free energy assessment where they will come into your building, they will look at your different end uses, create an audit report of different measures that you can implement, and then you can decide which measures that you want to move forward with. And then the CES program will manage that project from start to finish. So it's a very hands-off, one-stop shop program. And then finally is our Express.EnergySolutions program, which is designed for existing commercial buildings. It offers deemed rebates. It's supposed to be a little bit more simple, where the application process is a little bit simpler, the rebates are a little bit smaller. It's just supposed to be simple, more simple. And so one thing I wanted to highlight is all of these incentive programs offer electrification incentives, and all the electrification incentives are nearly equivalent in each of these programs. And so electrification incentives, that is specifically for replacing gas equipment when you are installing heat pumps for space heating, heat pumps for water heating, induction cooking, anything where you're switching gas to electric. That's what we consider an electrification incentive. Next slide. And so all of 4 of the incentive programs that I talked about, they all have very similar program requirements. They, of course, have to be located in the SMUD territory. They can't overlap with any of the other programs, but that shouldn't be a problem because most of the electrification incentives are going to be the same regardless of the program. And then the savings they can't be reliant on behavioral changes, and they have to be permanent electrification or energy efficiency modifications or some sort of automated controls. Next slide. And so this is kind of a summary of each of the programs, and so how to apply and how to participate with each of these programs. So we have one general phone number where if you do have questions about one of these programs, you can call them. They can direct you to one of the program managers. Alternatively, reach out to your strategic account advisor, and they can also help direct you to the appropriate program. But just going through these quickly, our Express Energy Solutions program, you can apply for incentives through your My Account portal on smud.org. Like I mentioned, this is for smaller projects. It has an incentive cap of $20,000 per project, and all of the incentives are going to be deemed. There's no calculated incentives as part of that program. Our Complete Energy Solutions program is managed by our program implementer TRC, and they have the only requirement is that for any rebates that exceed the $50,000 mark, they do require a pre-approval from SMUD. So that means getting in early and not starting the project before contacting TRC or the Complete Energy Solutions email. The custom retrofit and the integrated design solutions programs, these programs require pre-approval. So that means getting to us as early as possible before anything's purchased, before designs are finalized, before purchase orders are put in. We want to help you make sure that the project will qualify for incentives if that's their main goal. And we also have some design assistance. We have some experience with electrification projects. We can help review designs and make sure that they're going to qualify for our incentives. And so both of these programs do have a combined incentive cap of $250,000 per permitted project. And that $250,000 is made up of a cap of $100,000 from energy efficiency and $150,000 from electrification. And so those two caps can be added together for a total of $250,000. And then I was focusing on our commercial building electrification incentives, but I did want to put a shout out to our commercial electric vehicle charging program as well. This one also requires pre-approval. If you have specific questions about this program, I think it'd be best to reach out to that CommercialEV@SMUD.org, or if you want the specific program manager or your strategic account advisor, reach out to them. We can help you out with those incentives. So I wanted to talk specifically, go to the next slide. So I wanted to talk specifically about applying for incentives through the custom retrofit and the Integrated Design Solutions program. We try to make it easy. It's just a 2-page application that can be electronically filled out and then electronically signed. And to participate, the first step is just submitting a statement of interest. And that's the top half of the left PDF on the screen. And we need an application prior for custom retrofit. We do need the statement of interest prior to equipment being purchased, prior to anything being finalized, contracts being finalized, essentially before the project is started. For the Integrated Design Solutions program, we need the statement of interest. We need that submitted prior to 100% DD set being issued. And so I just want to reiterate that it's never too early to bring us into the conversation, because we can help make sure that your program is going to take full advantage of our incentive programs. Next slide. And so the second step of applying for incentives is to reserve the incentives. And that's the bottom half of that first page that I've highlighted. And so a reservation is essentially SMUD's commitment to provide a specific incentive. And we do this reservation at the very beginning of the process, before construction starts, before the installation of the measures are complete. So we will talk with you about what your project is, what the scope of work is. We can determine what the incentive is going to be from the very beginning. And then that's when we determine the incentive is at the very beginning. And then we fill in the reservation of, SMUD will fill in the reservation of incentive portion of the application. And this is our commitment to provide that incentive when the project is complete. And so the incentive can be reserved for either the customer or the contractor. We have flexibility on where the incentive is going to go. And we can reserve incentives up to 3 years in advance. And so this is primarily for new construction projects where they have very long lead times. We know what the incentives are going to be very early in the process, and then we just wait for the building to get built, and then when it's done, we have the incentive ready. We can do it for custom retrofit incentives as well, but we just commonly don't see projects take that long for the custom retrofit program, but it's still available. And then if you do have a project that has started even further than, or that has a lead time of even longer than 3 years, we can still reserve incentives for you. It just has to be negotiated. So next slide. And so, okay, now I wanted to talk more specifically about our Go Electric electrification incentives. And so there's really only 2 requirements. The first one is that the equipment is replacing gas equipment. So these are gas to electric conversions. The incentives are structured where most of them are going to be deemed. And we do this so that you know very early what the estimated incentive is going to be. And just keep in mind that even though you can very easily calculate the incentive very early in the process, you will still need that reservation of incentive before the project gets started. So very common, that estimated incentive is going to equal that reserved incentive, but they are going to, we do need that reservation early in the process. And then the only requirement for efficiency is that it meets the current minimum Title 24 efficiencies. And so the incentives are structured into 3 categories. We have our equipment incentive, which is just a per cooling ton or per unit incentive. We have a panel and infrastructure support incentive, and then finally a permitting support incentive. And the final incentive is actually the sum of all of these incentives. And I'll have an example in a couple of slides that we can look at. Next slide. So these are our Go Electric electrification incentives specifically for space heating equipment. And so you can see that there's the 3 different columns that represent 3 different types of incentive. So for space heating, it's a per ton incentive between $500 to $1,000, depending on the type of equipment. We have our $1,000 to $2,000 per outdoor unit for electrical infrastructure improvement incentives, and then a flat $750 per permitted project that we add on. We can also offer a $3,000 per ton incentive for built-up heat pump systems or heat recovery chillers, or it can be calculated. So just if you have a project that doesn't fit into one of these categories, you can still qualify for incentives. It's just going to be custom calculated. And we can help you determine if it's going to be custom calculated or if it's going to fit into one of these categories. Next slide. And so these next incentives are for our heat pump water heater incentives. And so similar to the space heating, we have the equipment incentive. In this case, it's per unit between $1,500 and $4,000. The electrical infrastructure improvement incentive between $1,000 to $2,000, and then the engineering permitting support, $750 per project. And so for our water heater incentives, to help you determine whether that water heater is a residential style, a commercial style, or a split system heat pump, if you go onto the CaliforniaEnergyWise.com/business rebates, SMUD has its own link where you can download a Excel sheet that lists out all of the qualifying heat pump water heaters and their associated rebates. And I just looked at it this morning. I think generally the commercial style heat pump water heaters are those which have 120 gallons, just for reference. But specifically, I would go on to that, the CaliforniaEnergyWise.com, look up the model number, and just confirm with that if you have a specific water heater that you're looking at. And then similar to the space heating incentives, we also have a $3,000 per ton for built-up heat pumps for domestic hot water. And we can also custom calculate that as well. So if you have a heat pump water heater system that doesn't quite fit into one of these categories, we can still provide an incentive. It's just going to be custom calculated. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to give an example of just how lucrative our electrification incentives are right now. And I really want to highlight that they are really, like, these are probably the most lucrative our electrification incentives are going to be. And so, yeah. So if we have an example of an office building or a warehouse building or some sort of building that has 25-ton gas heating rooftop units. So if you wanted to participate in the SMUD programs, if you installed the 25-ton like-for-like gas heating units, and they met the minimum efficiency required by, in this case, it'd be the Express.EnergySolutions program, we could provide $150 per ton for each of those units, and you would be eligible for a $15,000 incentive. If you installed heat pumps and replaced those gas units with electric and qualified for the electrification incentive, in this case, it would be $550 per ton for each of the units, $2,000 per unit for the infrastructure and panel support, and then the $750 per project. And adding all those together, it is more than $95,000 in incentives. So from SMUD, from the incentive programs, you could be eligible for more than $80,000 in SMUD incentives if you installed heat pumps as opposed to installing like-for-like units. And so I want to echo again, get us involved early in your decision-making process. I can provide these estimates for you in the proposal stage, in the bid stage. We can compare the incentive opportunities, but once we get the estimate, that's not quite the notice to proceed yet. You still need that reservation of incentive in order to make sure that you go through our full process and qualify for those incentives. Okay, next slide. And so I wanted to take a minute to also talk about our infrastructure capacity evaluation form. So we do know and we recognize that electrification, it's not going to be as simple as performing like standalone like-for-like equipment replacements. And that is because you are adding load. And oftentimes you are going to be adding electric resistance heating along with these heat pumps that could be adding load to buildings. And so if you're adding load to an existing panel, even if that panel doesn't need to be upgraded, there are occasions where the SMUD transformer might be maxed out and that could require an upgrade. And oftentimes this upgrade will be at the customer's expense. And so what we wanted to do is create an easy process for customers to be able to reach out to SMUD and see what the current capacity on their transformer is. And that would help them plan out their projects ahead of time. And so this is a courtesy evaluation of the existing transformer capacity. All we need is a signature, an email address, very simple project information. This will get submitted to our grid team. The grid team will look at your transformer, look at how large it is. We will look at the summer and the week peak loads of your building and then determine how much remaining capacity is on your transformer. And then you and your contractor can use that information to make sure that any equipment that you're adding onto the panel and onto that transformer is going to be within that available capacity. And sometimes we do get these forms back where the remaining capacity is 0 or it's very limited. And that doesn't always mean that the project can't move forward. There are ways that we can help you strategize how to still fit your scope within the available capacity. And so this is where it's important to get us involved as early as you can so that we can help you through these, just help you through these challenges. So, all right, next slide. So, yeah, I guess next steps, we are available to help sit in during any sales team meetings that you have or any design team meetings. Feel free to call or email us with questions, and we can help bring us your projects so we can help estimate incentives for you and review proposals and so yeah, we're here to help you and help you through your electrification journey. So.
All right.
Yeah. So thank you very much, everyone.
Perfect. So, if we can, do you know how to unmute all, Nishant? Or do we just say, so at this point, if you'd like to unmute and ask a question, you're more than welcome to. I know there's been a lively chat going on in the background, lots of websites being shared to support either on the PG&E side or on the SMUD side for the electrification and resources, financing support, etc. So yeah, if there's any further questions, please feel free, unmute yourself and And looks like we did have a handful of people who had to drop off at the 5:30 mark, but still have a good crew here. It's been really great information for me so far, because I know I've been consistently looking for what's available for us in the work that I'm doing with a lot of my customers. So I've gotten a lot of useful information out of it.
Worked for me as well.
Excellent.
I've used some of these programs, so it's been great.
Yeah, and it's good to hear what the current variety of them are. All right. So hearing no other questions right now, I want to thank everybody for attending. We will make the slides available on our website and the link available as well for the recording. Please feel free to reach out to any of the presenters if you have further questions, or reach out to the board if you want to suggest any ideas for future meetings. I did want to share in the recording, Dan, thank you for putting it in the chat. Our trip to the Sierra Nevada Brewery Tour is October 18th, and the tour is at 3 p.m. So we'll have signups available for that if anyone is interested in joining us. And we look forward to seeing you at some of our future events as well. So special thanks to Kelly, to Jeff, and to John as our presenters. It's just a great wealth of information, and hopefully we'll get a lot more people turning to these resources to help in the decarbonization push over the next 7 to 15 years. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.